I'm going to introduce the presenter of the next panel session. This, of course, will run like the others. You can put up your questions in the live Q&A if you have any questions to do with NRRA. Dr. David Phelps will be chairing this session. As you heard earlier, he is the immediate past president of the Australian Rangeland Society and a Longreach long-term local. He'll be joined by Bruce Scott, also a man who the West is very familiar with, the former mayor of the Barcoo Shire, who is now an advisor for Shane Stone. They will also be joined by Chris Pollard, who's the Assistant Director for Flood Policy Section of the Resilience Programs, and also Mark Drew, who is the Director, National Capability Programs with Resilience Strategy and Design. And we're hopeful that Sophie Cartwright, Executive Director of Resilience Programs, will be able to join us soon. She's having a few issues. So I'm going to hand over to Dr. David Phelps to run the next discussion.
Thank you, Nicole, and thank you to all of our viewers, both online and somewhat bizarrely, just around the corner from where Bruce and I are sitting at the moment in the main hall of the Longreach Civic Centre. I myself have worked with Bruce and Chris and Shane and others from the NRRA for roughly 3.5 years or so now, 2.5, Bruce, I think it'll be, initially in response to the disastrous flooding and cold trough across northern Queensland in early 2019. Devastating flooding and conditions there. A lot of that event actually led to processes and procedures that are now reflected within the NRRA, and to me it's terrific to actually see that that there is a silver lining from events such as that one, because I think we're much better prepared now in a range of ways for those types of disasters into the future. But the preparation will continue. The way this particular session will run, everyone will be able to see Chris and Mark on your screens, as well as Bruce and myself here together in Longreach. In a moment, I'll ask Bruce to outline a few words from himself as an advisor within the NRRA, and then we'll also hear from Chris and Mark, and then we'll get into some nice discussion with the audience, and as your questions come through, and every once in a while Nicole will chip in too, which would be just great. So it's my pleasure now to hand over to Bruce Scott. Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you very much, David, and it's a great pleasure to be here. And as Nicole said in her generous introduction, my name is Bruce Scott, and since leaving the cattle industry, local government and the beloved Channel Country, where I spent most of my life, I now work with the National Recovery and Resilience Agency as an advisor, Major General the Honourable Shane Stone, ACQC, who passes on his well wishes for the conference and sincerest apologies for not being here in person. My background: I spent 32 years as a beef producer in the Queensland Channel Country near Windora. I also had 26 years in the public and not-for-profit sector, including 22 years in local government and as Mayor of Barcoo Shire, as Nicole said. Also, apart from my substantive role with the NRRA, I'm also a director of a number of boards that are complementary to my position, including the Foundation for Rural and Regional Renewal, FRRR is known by, the South West Hospital Health Service, Southern Queensland Landscapes, the Red Ridge Foundation and the Rural Financial Counselling Service North Queensland. I also have an interest in First Nations people, their culture and their future opportunities. I've had to learn to talk a little less and listen much more in this role. Resilience, well, resilience is not just one thing, but a culmination of many parts, including people, knowledge, environment, infrastructure, services, and most importantly, care, empathy, an informed approach to the big picture of ensuring the safety of humanity and the preservation of the future by sound decision making and the right attitude towards natural resource management. Amongst this list, which is not exhaustive, is both the macro and micro parts that make long-term resilience a reality. But in short, resilience should be about being happy in your surroundings, while at the same time being prepared as possible to withstand the shocks that come our way. This could be a natural disaster or man-made disaster, a financial downturn, sickness, a tragedy, or as we've seen of late, a global pandemic. In my experience, there are some things we could concentrate on in public policy settings and community attitude that ensure that as a nation and as individuals allow resilience to be natural and organic. There is no doubt with the standing up of the National Recovery and Resilience Agency as a response to the Royal Commission into National Natural Disaster Arrangements, the Morrison government is serious about getting community safety and recovery on a solid footing for the future, based on the principles of long-term resilience. I've listed just a few broad headings from conversations had that could be considered as a very quick deep dive into to stimulate the panel session next. I've headed those up as community, environmental, economic, social, and understanding public risks and community vulnerability. And under those broad headings, I've dot pointed some things that may stimulate that conversation. Access to housing of an appropriate standard that meets appropriate building codes for the known or potential risks, i.e. fire, flood, severe weather events and industrial harm. Aesthetically pleasing surrounds, good amenities, pools, sports and recreation facilities, places of gathering, community halls, etc. Dedicated and well-resourced law and order, emergency service and giving volunteers. The provision of a minimum standard of social services, medical, schooling, banking, grocer, butcher, etc. The normal things you would see in a community, a homogenous society. The attraction and retention of people and professionals is so important. School teachers, medical practitioners, police, emergency services, and the list is long. Access to modern communications, broadband, fixed and mobile services. Transport services at an appropriate mix of private and public with sealed access and all-weather airstrips. Under the heading environmental, clean air, of course, clean water with sound resource management, healthy soils for agriculture and the maintenance of the environmental balance and retention of biodiversity, water security, environment, agriculture and domestic needs, understanding the climate and how it might affect where we live in and managing that risk in an appropriate way, a proactive way, I should say. Not being or ending up in a position that depletes or destroys the natural resource, drought response or ignorance to the responsibility. A commitment to carbon reduction. Under the heading economic, jobs that are meaningful and provide an opportunity for higher paying jobs and career pathways where possible. Providing economic and environment for business to thrive, i.e. planning schemes, local laws that are flexible and appropriate, but considerate of the risk, a supportive community, supportive and understanding financiers. Agricultural enterprises to better understand their weather, commodity and financial risks and have the capacity to mitigate these risks and provide better decision-making processes. Adaptation is fundamental. Today's households and businesses tend to be highly geared, which leaves no capacity to absorb shock. Lending is at an all-time high, with low interest rates, high demand for housing and agricultural property, public money artificially priming the economy. There is a real potential for an overheated and serious financial situation. Social. Adequate social services that are a minimum for a modern community. Good community spirit, a welcoming attitude. Strong services and sporting clubs. There is a presence of the arts and culture. Managing mental health and well-being associated with a modern society in a holistic way. Start treating the causes of the angst rather than the symptoms. Understanding public risk and community vulnerability. The implementation of risk reduction and mitigation strategies, having the appropriate emergency response equipment, having a reliable pool of well-trained and devoted emergency response personnel and volunteers, ensuring our public assets and utility services are built and maintained in a way that limits their exposure to damage from disasters. These are just some key points for us to all to consider when we return to our day-to-day lives. And we can start thinking in ways that from little things we do, big things can grow. We all have a responsibility and we really are all in this together. Thank you, David.
Bruce, thank you. Thank you very much. And I think that that last phrase is just spot on. We all have responsibility in preparation for disasters, for drought. We all need to be proactive. And as I said in the video previously that you saw, to me, it really is all about the people, and it's all about the communities. And Bruce, you've obviously been listening. That's to the communities and people as you've been travelling around in your role as advisor to the NRRA. Quite a list there, mate, of things to discuss for the next half hour. But we'll come back to that in a moment. I really will encourage everyone there to type in questions as we go throughout the panel, so that we can answer those questions. We do want this to be a nice interactive and engaging session with the audience. But before we get on to any further questions, I'd actually like to hand over to Mark first to also give us an outline of your role, mate, and I guess what you would like to address the panel on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. Mark Drew, Director of the National Capability Programs that are being developed through the NRRA. Historically, I've been with Queensland Government for an extended period of time with the Queensland Reconstruction Authority, and spent a lot of time out with rangelands. And now with the new agency, having the opportunity to work at that national level to look at these sort of capability programs. Bruce provided a huge amount of information just now, and as did Shane with the video. But I think in terms of what we're looking at, the events are not going to get smaller. They're going to intensify. They're going to get more extreme. We have this ongoing challenge with that, and in terms of cascading events or compounding events. So you don't even have time to recover or get back on your feet, or just gotten back onto your feet from one event and another one hits. So there's compounding impacts and multiple events, a significant issue for everyone, as is the cascading consequences of those events, how infrastructure impacts on economic impacts on individuals. So these things sort of flow through a community, which creates a massive challenge. How do we address that? Well, obviously we're talking about preparedness and resilience. What does that look like? I think it looks different to everyone. We heard through the video, there's so many different definitions, so many different content or thoughts that came out of when asked about resilience. It's not one thing, but it is about that accumulation of process, systems, thinking, preparedness and planning that all allows us to build strength and continue to grow as a community and as stakeholders within that community, be it the local level, state or national. And what we're trying to do is really assist those on the ground like yourselves in the face of those cascading events, in the face of that compounding impacts and that growing risk that we see, which can only be generated through that deeper understanding, which comes from that understanding of local context that Bruce is talking about, and then the application of that into a range of programs and initiatives that target those in a real fashion and tailoring those, recognising that what's happening at one community or one location is different to what's been experienced at another one because of that local context and that local risk profile, and how that is operated and incorporated is so important. And one of the things we try and do that is really about understanding that local context, not duplicating the work that's already underway in that location, incorporating it into the systems and initiatives we're developing. And for Queensland, for example, understanding the Queensland disaster management arrangements, understanding the work already in place, and then not working at cross purposes of be it local or state. And then assisting how that is evolving, working to adapt with community, build that diversity in terms of the environment, the community and the economies, so that they're more able to withstand those shocks, and not just those shocks of the disaster event, but also the stressors or ongoing long-term impacts of drought, and as we've said just before with COVID. So there's a range of things that sort of come up there. In terms of the work we're doing with Preparing Australian Communities or Preparing Australia package, that's one of the programs we're trying to tailor to the impacts of disaster events and build, prepare and build resilience with across the country. Also the work I'm doing with national capability programs, looking at piloting regional resilience hubs and understanding across levels of government working together to create an outcome for that community to build that capacity and assist and support community to grow and evolve in the face of these changing circumstances we see ourselves. Also looking at regional exercising, developing exercising programs, and recognising the challenge that limited capacity that people have. It's not about the capability that's there, but the capacity to get through all the work that's facing us, to have that long-term vision and support and assist that to grow and evolve. There's probably a few things we can talk about. The other thing, I guess, is also how we engage. Obviously, what Shane was talking about, the Regional Support Officer Network, and that local embedded support and understanding, not just from Bruce, but from a broad network of people who are from community, engage in community, understand that community, and feed that into the policy and program teams. So we're not Canberra-centric, we're not in the bubble. We're actually have that understanding and engagement to evolve these programs in a tailored fashion. I'll probably stop there and hand over to Chris.
Great, thank you. That's terrific, Chris. Just before you jump in, I wouldn't mind just first of all, Chris, sorry to embarrass you, but congratulate you. This is a live event, and we're coming from live, and invariably someone's always going to walk behind someone in the background. You just had to be the first, mate. I won't pretend that the audience probably didn't see that, but it's all good. We're live, and it's a bit of fun, and it's all unique for all of us. So it's it's all part of it. It's great stuff. But Chris, before I do cut to you, I'd actually like to just tease out a little bit between Mark and Bruce. You've both mentioned the local context, how important it is to support local communities through their local solutions. And Shane Stone certainly talked about that as well in his welcoming introductory video there. Bruce, I might just cut to you first. How do you see not just the agency working with local communities, but I guess all of us, fair income, being in this together? That was your closing remarks. We're all in it together. How do we do it?
Well, I think, creating an environment which our agency is doing on the ground as we speak, and we're recruiting more and more people to be on the ground and engaging with. And I always talk about our agency being an advocate for not every solution is going to be the same, without a doubt, but to be that eyes and ears on the ground of firstly our Coordinator General, but also the Australian Government, the Prime Minister and our Minister, that we answer to invariably. But I think we're also bringing people together. I think we're joining the conversations, and by joining those conversations through state, local and federal, and also the not-for-profits, we can actually provide solutions. And we've seen some examples of that just recently. A combined example of the Cohen airstrip, where we put the state and federal programs together, and we were able to seal that airstrip prior to their wet season, and getting the work done so that community is resilient as far as air traffic and their resupply through the wet season. So that's the sort of stuff as an example of what we can get done by using our collective knowledge, our partnerships, and the people that the relationships we grow on the road and out in the field each and every day. So I think that's the way we can get stuff done. It's not stepping over each other. It's about joining together and on a common cause and fixing the stuff at the micro level, but also engaging with government to where there might be the best spend of public money in giving that our community safety the best possible way.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. Mark, I might keep you on pause just for the moment, thanks, and hand over to Chris. Chris, you've been involved with this agency since its inception, and particularly through the 2019 flood event. Mate, I'll just ask if you could perhaps outline how that flood event helped initiate the agency, and also put into place things such as recruiting local community members into the support roles that are now in place right across Australia. Over to you, Chris.
No worries. Can everyone hear me all right? Okay. Yes, my name is Chris Pollard. I began with the agency in March 2019, day one. I was brought across because of my background in livestock industry, working at the Department of Ag for a number of years on livestock policy. And, you know, for a big chunk of the first part of the agency's existence, it was mostly livestock related sort of crisis. However, the more and more we got to know people on the ground, you know, you're getting out there a lot, you know, it's bigger than the livestock industry, bigger than agriculture, you know, and the flood exposed, you know, vulnerabilities in all elements of the economy and society. So, you know, from the east in Townsville and all the way out to near Cloncurry, I guess, as the furthest west, and to Winton. Yeah, that's how our thinking and our thinking on resilience, or my thinking personally on resilience, has been really framed by that event and by the work with community to sort of come up with a long-term strategy. But to answer David's question on having locally embedded or local knowledge embedded, and it's something that was it's still part of our ethos. It was from day one, was locally understood, locally implemented, and so, you know, knowing people on the ground, knowing who to talk to was critical. And so before we had the regional recovery officers, or regional recovery support officers, they're known now, we relied really on the Queensland government's initiative to implement industry recovery officers. So in the West, the industry recovery officers were locals, and they were, for the first 12 to 18 months that they were in place, absolutely critical to knowing who to talk to, knowing when we're actually consulting. You know, we constantly ask David Phelps, you know, and the recovery officers, the industry officers, is this the right way to talk to people? You know, and you point out blindingly obvious things to us because we're from Canberra. No, that's not. You know, it just, I guess, the best way, the way that I think we were most effective is that we had the ability to find the local people, local community members, and, you know, obviously listen to them, because we were afforded a very rare privilege to be able to have, you know, the budget to travel to northwest Queensland, which for Canberra is nearly as far as you can sort of go. Maybe Darwin's a bit further, and Perth is, you know, just further again. But but having that local network on the ground meant that we could really effectively get the messages back to Canberra, back to the, you know, different arms of government in Canberra and all the departments, and, you know, say this is exactly what's happening on the ground. And without having that original industry recovery network, I don't think it would have been nearly as effective. And also, you know, having people who joined us later, and they're also on the ground, so that's been ongoing. It's our eyes and ears. And COVID has just really brought to attention that it's even more important, because we can't. Now I'm stuck in Canberra in a room. Normally we'd be up in the region, so, you know, we're still making do. So does that answer the question?
Chris, great, thank you. And we would have loved to have had yourself and Mark here in Longreach in person. You were really looking forward to it, as are the 220 people dialing in from home or the home office who haven't been able to make it to Longreach. It's such a shame, but the 80 or 90 of us here are having a great time. We're having a great time on your behalf, so don't worry. We do have a couple of questions from the audience. I'll just cut to those. The first from John Brisbane. G'day, John. Anyone who knows John knows that he has always puts forward very good questions. John, I'll try and summarise it, and I reckon anyone who's going to dial into your 15-minute presentation on Thursday morning, I think it is, will hear more of the context of what you're asking, but I'll try and sum it up. John, I think what you're really saying is that communities are expected to respond, and local communities, of course, are in the best position, aren't they, Bruce, to actually respond. You know, it's that local knowledge, it's that local capacity that's so important. But John, you're outlining that it can be quite challenging, particularly when the economies of communities are stressed and stretched, particularly when you might have declining populations, as we have experienced across parts of central Western Queensland, for instance, due to the drought over the last few years. And even though volunteering rates, for instance, are always high in our outback and rangeland communities, when population numbers are starting to dwindle, it does become more challenging for communities to actually support themselves. So I think, John, to try and paraphrase your terrific question there, how do we ensure that, that our economies, that our communities can actually prepare for themselves, can actually be proactive, and be ready to go? And it's not just about local government or state government or a particular federal agency. It's about how all of us can actually chip in and contribute to make this really happen. And Bruce, I might cut to you first.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, David. And I think, that I spoke when my little 5 minutes around those micro issues and things you can do at a very fundamental household level that makes a difference. And it gets to, and Queensland's got a great Get Ready program, but making sure that you, in your own patch, that you do the right thing, keep the grass down, make sure there's no, tin in the yard that can end up being a missile, or the coconut trees well trimmed, all the things that what happens inside your yard doesn't affect your family or your next door neighbour or someone down the street. And engage with your local utility service if you see something wrong. Engage with your local government. Most local government now have got a disaster dashboard. They've got really intelligent apps now that snap, send and solve type things. So there's a lot of things out there. If a community's engaged, it can make the job of local, state and federal government much easier. Do the right thing. Treat your environment as a global sort of habitat where a bit that you do doesn't impact on someone else, but the bit that you do does impact on a positive way to the elderly couple next door, or the or the young family down the street that are struggling a bit financially with the pressures of today's society. So reaching out to people and not being a stranger is a great thing to do in a modern society. I think it's something we're losing. Get to know your neighbours. And if something goes wrong, you know who to reach out to. And if something goes wrong for them, something is amiss by their habits changing, you seek it out and act at a local level. So I think that's, to answer to the question, I think that's how we can change a lot and not expect government to be there to pick up the pieces every time something goes wrong, but to just operate it organically at a local level.
Yes, Bruce, I think that's so important. And get to know your neighbours, get to know your community. Most of us do that within our outback and rangeland communities. We a little bit later on, we've actually got a live polling question asking you about your community. We won't go to that just yet, but it is coming up. So, John, I know your question was a lot more detailed than that, but we'll enjoy your presentation as well and have an engaging discussion when you're on stage yourself. We also have a question here now specifically around drought, and it's so important right across all of the arid, semi-arid parts of Australia, right across the rangelands. And the question, thank you, Bev. It's in the case of drought frequency in Queensland, which is so high. The question is, when should we stop regarding drought as a natural disaster and instead consider it to be the normal state of affairs? Bruce, I'm not sure if you'd like to jump in first, or
I've seen my share of them, Dave.
You've seen your share of them, Bruce. Yes, that's right. As a cattle producer down near Windora,
most variable climates in Australia, but I guess the term drought is not actually a natural disaster in the real sense in the DRFA determinations, but.
So that's the disaster recovery DRFA. Yeah. What does that stand for, Bruce?
Disaster funding arrangements.
Disaster recovery funding arrangements. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
So it's not eligible for that type of support, even though government does support drought in many ways, both state and federal and at a local level. But there's no doubt that we need to be more adaptive to our climate, and we can't be expecting government to pick up the pieces every time it gets dry. So preparing for what we know is in the science now is not only we currently live in a very, very variable climate, highly variable climate, and it's going to get worse. So we need to try and mitigate that risk. Have our business model in a way that that you can respond to those long periods of low or no income. That you're not geared to the to the max. So you have some people you've got no income for 6 or 12 months that you're not going to suffer badly, not only your business but your family as well. So it's a huge question. If you wanted to get into it, David, I'm not sure if we've got time today.
No, we don't. Unfortunately, Bruce. We've only got about 3 or 4 minutes left in this session in total. And there is one other question that's just popped up, and it's from Andrew Ash, Chair of our Australian Rangeland Publications Committee. And Andrew, thank you for your question, which is actually a shameless plug to say that there's now online the special issue of the Rangeland Journal, specifically on drought management. There's some terrific papers in there. And if you're not already signed up to the Rangeland Journal, it's well and truly worth reading some of those. But I do know that, for instance, we have Neil Cliff presenting in a while. He's an author on one of those papers, as is David Coburn and Roger Stone, who are also upcoming presenters. I shall just check, because we do need to wrap up. Mark, I'll check with yourself if you'd like to put forward any closing comments. Bruce, sorry, I think you've had enough words already. Mark, any closing comments you'd like to make?
No, look, I think Bruce has had some really good content there, and I think just building on one of the things he said in terms of that layering of it is the community level who's first there. They're the ones impacted, and they step outside of the houses and then start doing the cleanup. That's just something that we all do. That layering of that individual, family, business, community, local government, state government, national government, federal government. That layering of effort and having the understanding, moving backwards and forwards through that layers, so that we can draw on the most pertinent or compelling challenges and try and address them as a system, as a collective, I think is really, really important, and it's something that we're all learning to do and working hard to do. And there's some really interesting work to be done, working with the team there and elsewhere across the country. So I think it's lots of stuff to do, but I think it's a really good momentum that we've never seen before at a national level, coming from so many different things, be it the Royal Commission or other state reviews, and also local planning and regional development activities. There's so many different things, and drawing on that momentum and drawing from that energy, I think, is such a good opportunity for us moving forward.
Great, Mark, thank you. And I can see that the first live poll question is open there at the moment. I'm going to close that off in 3, 2, 1 and share the results. And we have, well, interesting. We've got a narrow winner of landscape health, voted by the audience as the most important aspect of building resilience, but then pretty much neck and neck with a tie for people and communities and diversifying regional economies. So some terrific feedback there. I can also see Nicole, and of course all of you watching from everywhere in the world can't see this, but Nicole's just through the door, and we've got some technical difficulties with Nicole. So I'm just going to ask if we can have the next question, please, which is about considering all pressures. So we'll actually, sorry, we're out of time. What a shame. We had some great more questions there for the live polling, but I think the most important one was to identify that landscape health, closely followed by regional economies and communities, are the key. So, look, great. Thank you, Bruce. Thanks, you, David. Yes, thank you very much.
Absolute pleasure. And
Chris and Mark, thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure hosting this session, and we hope that you all enjoyed it and also got something out of it. So I think that's a wrap, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thanks, everyone.